Ahoy Vishem, it's Jen from Dream Prague. Now, if you are not Czech, but you're lucky enough to have come to the Czech Republic, you've probably walked through the center of the city and you've seen amazing architecture, impressive monuments, turtleneck stands, and if you come at Christmas, the Christmas markets. But there are a lot of things that you encounter in a regular day in Prague when you live here that you never see as a tourist. So in this video, I kind of wanted to talk about some of the things that you see on the streets of Prague that you would never see in America. So the first thing you probably see when you're here is the gorgeous architecture in ice cream colors and different styles kind of meshed together, and it's really quite impressive. But then you look down to street level and you notice that there's a lot of graffiti. And here I'm sort of differentiating between street art and tagging, just like spraying your name on something. And I guess that's a subjective thing, but for me, dedicated street art is art and graffiti is just messing with the beautiful building. In the United States, if you see graffiti on the streets, that tends to imply that this is a dangerous area. So when we've had American visitors, we've taken them to the center and even around our neighborhood, and they've seen graffiti and they kind of got the impression that it was dangerous, which is a little laughable to me because it's not dangerous in this city at all, but I forgot that feeling of being around graffiti and thinking that this must be a crime-ridden area. So that's something that you just start to get used to after you live in Europe for a while. And even some of the most beautiful buildings have graffiti, and it's a shame, but it doesn't mean it's a dangerous place. Another really strange thing to see if you're from the United States in Prague is that there's street construction everywhere, especially during the summer. And I'm talking about giant unattended holes on this street. I mean, this city is so old that constant construction is really just how it stays at like an above ground level. I had a friend visiting Prague, and he is a professional pipe fitter in San Francisco. So it's his job to understand the nature of everything that goes on underground. And he was mortified at the lack of safety precautions that the construction workers had taken. In the United States, we're a very litigious country. That means that we sue each other a lot when we get injured. And if you are responsible for an obstruction in the road, someone could sue you and get millions of dollars in money because you didn't take proper care of what you were responsible for. So they could even sue the city if they were injured. In many places where it snows, if you don't personally clear the snow on the sidewalk in front of your house and somebody slips, they can sue you for possibly hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars if they are injured in that place. This is just such a strange concept for Czechs. I mean, they just kind of believe in personal responsibility, and if you were dumb enough to fall in an obvious hole, it seems like you shouldn't be walking on the streets. And also, in America, if you're injured in some sort of accident like this and you don't sue someone, you will have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for your medical care. Whereas in the Czech Republic, everyone has mandatory, reasonably priced health insurance. So it's not gonna bankrupt you if you get injured. You can just use your insurance. I was walking on Pařížka, which is in Old Town. It's like the street with all the sort of international luxury brands. So you could say it's like one of the fancier streets in Prague. And there was construction on one side of the street with scaffolding. And all of a sudden, a giant wooden beam comes falling down 3 stories and just crashes on the sidewalk below, which was open for pedestrians. Thank God all of the pedestrians were on the other side of the street. But everyone just kind of like shrugged and just kept walking. In America, there'd be like police on the scene. The Czechs are just like, don't walk near construction. Another thing is, in Prague, the streets themselves are gorgeous. Now, if you've been to Old Town, obviously you've seen the cobblestones on the streets and the cobblestones on the sidewalk, But those cobblestones exist all the way out into the other districts of Prague. It's just like the natural surface of the street. And the sidewalks are constructed in beautiful black and white patterns. And the patterns vary depending on where you are in Prague. And there's a central office that essentially designs these patterns and where they're gonna go. So when the workmen go out, they know what they have to do. And the workmen said that these stones actually come from the Jeseník mountains in Silesia. So the stone is from the Czech Republic as well. And so when they need to get under to do construction or to fix pipes, etc., they simply pull all of the stones out of the street, and then afterward put them in a big pile, and then afterwards they put them back. And I had a Japanese friend visiting, and we were walking around Old Town, and he was just like not interested in the monuments. He was just taking pictures of the holes in the ground with the people putting the stones into little piles. Now, some of the stones at the base of Wenceslas Square are a little bit bigger. They're like big cubes like this. And back in the late days of communism, Gorbachev was coming to visit Prague, and so they were doing some renovations to the center. And they started putting these new cobblestone, big ones, into the ground. Well, it turns out that some of these cobblestones had dates on them and parts of names on them etched into it, and it turns out that they were from a Jewish cemetery that had been left unattended for a really long time, and so the cemetery was raided, and somehow these tombstones got cut up and used for construction in Prague. And so as of last year, there's this movement to slowly take those out of respect, obviously, and put them into the Jewish cemetery here in Prague, because there's little way to tell whose tombstone they came from or where to return them to. And some of them still exist. So if you're at the base of Wenceslas Square, that is, you're sitting in the open area where you're looking up towards the museum, that's the base. Some of those stones are actually from a Jewish cemetery. Now you might notice, particularly in the old Jewish quarter, Josefov, which is in Prague 1, but they're in other parts of the city too, there are these golden cobblestone markers, and they're called stumbling stones. And they were the project of a German artist named Günther Demnig. And his whole idea was to commemorate the Jews and the other victims of the Nazis. And so he places these stones with the names and the dates of birth and presumed death in front of the people's homes where they last lived. And these stones are not only in Czech Republic. And the owners of the buildings didn't want them necessarily like a commemoration on the building itself, and so the stones, I kind of like it. It makes it sort of like part of the city as opposed to just part of like a private building. But that's what those are. I can't think of any place in the United States that I've seen cobblestones. Maybe one or two streets in New York City, one or two streets in Boston, but Prague is just like, that is just the normal covering to the earth. And driving in a car, it looks charming when a horse and buggy is going over it, but it makes for a headache. I don't know how the cab drivers do it. So another thing is, there are many parks in Prague and little sort of slices of green area, and everybody seems to have a dog. And so what the cities do, the cities meaning Prague 1, Prague 2, Prague 3, they have trash cans everywhere. There are lots of trash cans in Prague, and people are very much encouraged to use them. But there are also dispensers with brown poop bags for the dogs. And it really leaves dog owners no excuse to leave the dog waste on the ground. And I think relative to other big European cities that we do have a low rate of dog excrement on the ground. Some people might disagree, but for me, generally the streets are fairly clean, and I think that really helps out. I remember being in Tokyo and having trash and like no trash cans on the street. They just like, I had to put the trash in my purse. So in Prague, I don't know, having trash cans leaves people no excuse to put a cigarette butt on the ground or to not pick up after their dog. The next thing that's kind of strange about when you're on the streets of Prague is not something you see, but something you hear. Every first Wednesday of the month at a few minutes to 12, you'll hear an announcement, but generally it's like muted enough that you can't really understand it, even though they've added English to it, but it's still kind of hard to hear. But then at 12 on the dot, you'll hear this. The first time I heard it, I was in Prague 1 in the Lucerna building, and I was teaching a classroom of teenagers, and none of them even blinked. And I was thinking, okay, I've been a teacher for like a week. I don't have the capability of dealing with like war. So what the hell is going on? I was not prepared to deal with that. It basically sounds like the Germans are like 5 minutes out and they're gonna drop bombs on the city. It has a very ominous feeling to it. And it sounds like it's from the World War II, or at least communist times, but it was actually installed in 2002. Now you'd think that another emergency notification system would work better, like phone texts or something. I suppose there are quite a few elderly people that don't check their phones like every 5 minutes, so the warning system for them works. But it's fun to be around unsuspecting tourists when it goes off. The panic is only momentary because no other locals are responding to it, but it definitely shows them they're not in Kansas anymore. Another thing you might notice in Prague is sort of the product of a bygone era, and that's the presence of tailor shops or cobbler shops. I didn't even know that cobblers existed outside of fairy tales, but there are a lot of them in Prague, and it's good because the streets, cobblestones, like eat your shoes. Shoes are not like fashion statements here, they're functional. And I think the reason that there are so many tailors and cobblers is because they haven't fully adopted the throwaway culture of other Western countries. So if you've lost or gained weight, you would just like take in your trousers or let out your trousers instead of just like chucking them and buying a new pair. And I can take my boots to the cobblers every other year, and they'll last for years instead of having to basically throw them away. I love this mentality. I hope that this stays in the younger generation of Czechs. Speaking of specialty shops, there are tons of specialty shops in Prague, and I think that that is definitely not how America is anymore, where there used to be like a hardware store and you'd go here for your underwear and things like that. Now in America we have like giant shops like Target, Walmart. Anything you need, you can get at one of those shops. Whereas in Prague, there's like a sock shop and a cheese shop. And here's where you get your essential oils, or if you need some like healthy tea. And you can get your prescription medicine here, but you have to get your shampoo at this place. And it's kind of a weird like early stage capitalism. That sounds wrong. I mean, it's like before capitalism allowed big corporations to sort of take over and push all the other small shops out. Kind of like how it was maybe in the 50s in the United States. So as far as convenience goes, you would think that driving your car to Target, finding parking in a parking lot that's bigger than the actual store, and then going into the store and getting everything you need all at once would be more convenient. But somehow it just seems less convenient, because here I just run downstairs and I can get all of those things in the distance of like a few blocks. And so it's not really inconvenient to me. And when all I really need is to get some shampoo, I don't have to drive to essentially a shopping mall, park, go in and get shampoo. I just go to the one store that has like shampoo and soap. It's a little confusing when you go to the sort of what we call a drugstore, where you would buy like cleaning products, soap, things like that, but they don't have cough medicine. For that you have to go to the Lekarna, which is the pharmacy. So sort of learning where they sell different things is tricky. But when you're walking on the streets in Prague and you're looking at the different storefronts, it's quite unique in that there's a lot of specialty shops still left over. Another type of shop where is absolutely essential part of Prague culture is called a pochervini. And although I think Americans are the only ones that call it that, maybe večerka. Anyway, we call it the pochervini. It's like in the United States, what we call a 7-Eleven or a gas station shop. They're all independently owned and they're generally run by the Vietnamese community here, oddly. Although mine is run by some Bangladeshis. But in the pochervinis, you get like your quick like ramen, go-to food, your candy, your snacks, your beer, your alcohol, your cigarettes, those type of thing. And sometimes there's next to them or attached to them is a ovoce a zelenina, which is like a fruit and vegetable shop. And I love shopping at those stores for produce because you can often get fresher produce than from the supermarket, and it doesn't come with like all this like plastic wrap. So the last thing that you might notice on the streets of Prague is uncontrolled intersections. And maybe there's some order to these intersections that I just don't know, and I should as a driver, but I just approach them like they're uncontrolled. There's no stop signs, there's no traffic signals, and there's trams coming in every which way. And there's pedestrians who are not really obeying the law, they're just kind of like going when they see an opening, and the cars pull up and they don't know what to do. They're trying to get out of the way of trams without killing the pedestrian. And I think the logic behind this uncontrolled intersection is that if everybody doesn't know what to do, then everybody is cautious and they slow down. There are signals for trams to see when they can go, but they kind of just go whenever and just like inch past each other. So if you are unlucky enough to drive in Prague, watch for pedestrians. They jump out in between cars, and I used to be one of those pedestrians until I got a driver's license, and now I realize just how very scary it is to drive in Prague when there are pedestrians crossing streets where they shouldn't be. So if you come to Prague and you want to know what it's really like to live here, definitely get out of the center because it's not representative of the way everyone else lives in the city. You can learn a lot by seeing how they shop, where they hang out. Don't be afraid of neighborhoods with graffiti. Watch for giant gaping holes in the ground. Appreciate the cobblestone sidewalks, and duck into a specialty shop to see how it differs from where you live in the States. Okay, that does it for me. If you are interested in moving to Prague, I have a free course for you, and it's in the link below, How to Move to Prague. And if you're Czech, thanks for watching. If you've got an idea for something I should talk about, please write it in the comments. Uvidíme se příští týden. Ahoj!